When I found out that there was a little game coming out called Star Wars Legion, which was essentially Star Wars Battlefront, but a miniature wargame version, I knew that I would eventually collect it all. I was so excited, and knowing that I was going to get every single thing for the game, I decided to first start with the Rebel Alliance, because I was honestly not that excited to paint up the Rebels. I wanted them still, but I knew I was least excited for them, so I thought, I'll knock them out early, and then I'll get to the really good stuff like the battle droids and the stormtroopers. However, in painting up the Rebels, I found I really enjoyed painting them. I got to paint some really cool things. Number one, this militarized Luke's land speeder, which is such a genius miniature. The Rebels don't have a lot of really cool ground stuff. They own space with the X-Wings and Y-Wings and B-Wings and Corvettes, but they don't have a lot of actual like cannon ground vehicles. And so the Luke's land speeder is just such a genius idea. While I was painting up my Rebel Alliance army, I struggled quite a bit. I was trying out this new thing called speed paints because Army Painter speed paints were brand new at the time, and I was definitely having a really hard time getting it to look good. I eventually started to learn. My generic Rebel troopers are pretty rough, but then my Rebel Commandos started to look a little bit better. I started to get a better understanding of how to use these new things, and eventually by the time I was working on my Commando sniper team, I was getting pretty darn good at the speed paints. It also wasn't helped by the original Rebel models being PVC miniatures, which were fine. My Rebel Alliance collection is a product of its time. It's not great, but it gets the job done, and I played some games with these suckers and they're pretty cool. However, now that I have so much experience under my belt, I have the opportunity to try it again. This is one of the new starter sets for Star Wars Legion, which is moving into a new edition, and inside of this box are plastic new and improved versions of the miniatures that I painted previously. And I want to see, what does 4 years of painting experience plus better miniatures look like in terms of redoing some of my oldest and okayest minis. Dumping out the box, it comes with everything you need to play. All the dice, tokens, and importantly, the cards. Can't wait to give these a read and see what's changed since the last time I've played. And then what I'm really excited for, new minis. Over the last few years, Legion has been moving from PVC to plastic, and they have been really good. Luke Skywalker is looking spiffy, and I'm really excited to try out the rank and file Rebel Troopers. On the sprue, each guy gets a letter distinguisher, so I know if I cut out all the A parts, those are the parts that I need to build one guy. The parts are pretty crispy, and go together smooth, and in no time, I had 1 done and 6 more to go. I'm gonna build a max squad of 7. I got all the bodies, arms, and legs together and was pleasantly surprised. I am really happy with these new plastic Rebels. They go together really nice. No mold lines to scrape, so you just gotta get rid of the sprue nubbies and then you're ready to go. And in terms of assembly, usually with a plastic model, the pieces kinda nest, so you kinda gotta figure out which way they go and then hold them for a few seconds while the glue dries. But these guys have some pretty big pegs, so everything just kinda clicks together. You just and then it's ready to go. Also, the thing that I'm most excited about is with these guys now being plastic, there's some customizability. Head options. There is a smattering of male and female human heads. These faces are much better than some of the faces we've gotten in the past. But who cares about boring old humans? We've also got Duros and Mon Calamari, and some male and female Twi'leks. I added as many alien heads as I could, and for the rest, I filled it in with normal Rebel heads with the Endor-style helmets. Now for the bases. To get a little bit of irregularity, I started out pressing in some little balls of milliput down on the bases to make little hills. Then I spread some thick mud texture paste covering up all the ground. Once that was dry, or at least dry enough, I took some Elmer's glue and sprinkled on some coconut husk. This creates some convincing leaf litter and small twigs, and I took some small pebbles and super glued these down where there was room, pressing them into the still wet milliput. This is much different from my forest bases I did before, and I think they'll turn out much better. I've learned a lot since then. Now for painting, and I want to paint them up the same way, really taking advantage of speed paint. I started out priming my Rebels in white. Then I sprayed a brown all over the bases and up into the model from below. Then from above, I sprayed a tan color. I'm doing a zenithal, but with some colors over white, so the models stay bright, but there's a little bit more vibrancy than just a classic black-white prime. And speaking of white, I hit their heads and shoulders with a little puff of white ink so that their heads are the brightest spot. Then I sealed in all the airbrush layers with some satin varnish. Now for painting. I took a green speed paint, thinned it down about 50-50 with medium, and then painted this onto at least one thing per guy. A few jackets and a few pants. Then I took a dark green and painted this onto the underside of the green bits to make them darker and more saturated in the recesses. This speed paint has given me my color, contrast, and shadows, and I want to build up the highlights a little more, so over the green I took some yellow and started to paint and sketch in some highlights, making sure to hit the tops of most parts and edge highlighting the wrinkles in the clothing so that the green really pops. Now to do this again with the brown. I took a brown speed paint, thinned it down, and put this over the rest of the minis, coming back with a dark brown speed paint, and again painting this into the recesses and undersides. After brown, I did a black using a very dark green speed paint, thinned down and painting this over the remaining clothing bits for the squad. For the gloves, I followed the artwork on the box and painted the gloves with a yellow, using some orange speed paint to shade them and then a light yellow for the highlights. Then for the remaining clothing, I hit these with a brown wash. Now onto the weapons and equipment. I thinned down some grim black speed paint and painted this over all the guns, pouches, and pockets. And a few of these suckers have some extra details on their jackets, and I hit these as well. Once the black had dried, I dry brushed the weapons with some gray paint and hit on all the edges. Then I mixed the black speed paint with brown to make a dark brown, and I painted this onto their backpacks and the soft parts of their Endor helmets. I gave these a dry brushing of a light brown, and I did a little bit of edge highlighting doing some dotty scratchy lines to make these packs look like leather. I used some brown paint to pick out the straps of their backpacks and some red for the donut armor that rings around their heads, giving them a little highlight and edge highlight with a brighter red. The speed paint did its job and let me finish their bodies quick, so now I can really spend some time perfecting their faces. For one of the Twi'leks, I went with a magenta base coat for her face and head tails, and then brightened it up by mixing in some light pink into my paint to brighten it up and doing a few layers of highlighting until I was painting her eyes. The old PVC rebels had craters where their eyes should be, so it's nice to have some actual sculpted detail. And for the second Twi'lek, I did blue. Then for the Duro, I used the same blue for the Twi'lek, but mixed in some black to desaturate it and then used yellow for a highlight so that the blue over the yellow will turn green to give him a different alien look. I went back and forth highlighting and glazing until he was a spiffy looking little alien, and to finish him off, I gave him red eyes with a little dot of orange right in the middle. He looks just like his card art. For the Moan Calamari, I started out painting his head in a few coats of orangey red speed paint. Then I picked out his eyebrows and gills with some orange paint. I used the brown paint from the backpacks to paint some patches on the top of his dome, and then I picked out his eyes with the yellow, then a big dot of black with a little white reflection to make them look big and watery. Now the fun was over and all the aliens were done, so I knocked out the humans, starting with some saturated red beige and then highlighting up through tan into pure white. Taking a little extra time to actually paint the eyeballs, starting with the dot of black, a smaller dot of white, and then a really small dot of black. I gave all my rebels a satin varnish to seal in the flavors, and now I can work on those bases. Continuing with my speed paint system, I took some brown and dark green and globbed this onto the bases, doing each base 50-50. Once that was dry, I took some Dirty Down moss and mixed in a few drops of water to thin it down. When you thin down Dirty Down, the product dries brighter, and I globbed this on over about 75% of each base, making random dotty patterns. This pooled really nicely in between all the different textures I put down and made for a really convincing forest floor. To add a little extra pizzazz, I took some grass tufts and glued these on. I like the tiny 2mm tufts. I feel like these are more in scale than the larger 6mm tufts. Then I painted the rim of the base a red-brown color to match the rest of my army. 7 brand spanking new Star Wars Rebel Troopers. And they are so much better than my first try. I mean, number one, the sculpts are much better, but number two, just the quality of the paint job. 4 years has upgraded my quality a lot. These original guys, they're fine, they're serviceable, but it's a lot like Star Wars Battlefront 1 versus Star Wars Battlefront 2, but the new Star Wars Battlefront 2. Like, there's such a crazy increase in quality, and that is particularly effective on the Rebellion. Painting up Stormtroopers is a lot of fun because you just spray them white, throw a Nuln Oil on there, and they look just like the thing from the movie. But the Rebels, getting a good looking face on every single guy adds so much character because the Rebels are characters. They're just a ragtag group of dudes. This is my 4th squad of Rebel Troopers, and so I don't really need more, but I'll definitely be putting together a few more of these models just so I can have some more aliens represented in my Rebel Alliance army. But speaking of that Rebel Alliance army, one of the other things I'm really excited for in this box is, this is Wookiees, but the Luke Skywalker. It is not Commander Luke Skywalker, it is operative Luke Skywalker. In Star Wars Legion, the named heroes from the movies can be brought in your forces as commanders, and bringing them gives your entire army certain buffs and benefits. But you usually still want to bring even more of the characters from Star Wars, and so that is where operatives come in. This is operative Luke Skywalker, and so instead of a force commander, he is just a pretty fancy dude. And this is the Luke Skywalker from the award ceremony. This is right after Star Wars 77, but before Empire Strikes Back. So this is plucky, adventurous Luke. I nipped off all the parts to build the man himself. There was very little cleanup to do, and the only real challenge was not much of a challenge, but it was deciding to go with fist arm or gun arm. I don't know who would pick fist arm. Then I glued on the lightsaber. Since Luke is an important character, I want to give him a tactical rock. I glued some cork down to the base and carved it up a little to give him a step up. He needs to be a little taller than everybody else. How else will you know how important he is? Once I got the cork looking good, I drilled up into his feet and inserted some lengths of sewing pins using some super glue to keep them stuck. Then I stabbed him into the base, and the nice thing about pinning is I can scoot his feet up into the air for now while I get the rest of the base done. I covered the tops of the cork with some muddy texture paste and added a few pebbles. Then I thinned down some white glue and sprinkled on some more coconut husk. Now that the base is done, I can paint up Luke. I want to do him a step above the troopers, but still use speed paint for the majority. Starting from his boots, I gave them a coat of black speed paint, and then for the highlights, I did a few layers starting with a gray. Going from a black to an almost white will make his boots look shiny, and I glazed a little bit more gray over these spots to darken them down just a little bit. Now onto his pants. I gave these a coat of brown and then started doing the same thing, carefully highlighting using a desaturated brown to brighten up his pants, and to highlight all the wrinkles. I painted the stripe running down his leg with some yellow paint, using the brown to make it follow the shading for his pants. I used black paint to pick out his holster, and then it was time for his shirt. Ceremony Luke wore a black shirt, so I just threw some speed paint right over top with no highlighting. His shirt is a soft material, so I don't want much contrast. Where I do want some contrast though is his spiffy yellow jacket. I took some yellow contrast paint and gave his jacket a once over. Then I mixed in some orange and hit the bottom half and under his arms to darken them and make these areas more saturated. To push the contrast, I took some off-white and started to highlight his shoulders, the ribbing of his sleeves, and all the wrinkles. I spent some time really perfecting his jacket, but you know what doesn't need any perfecting? EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is full of hobby goodies, and we now have Army Painter paints. We got Speed Paint, Fanatic, bundles, and we also have my favorite Vallejo texture pastes. If you're looking for paint, we got it, along with all sorts of other hobby goodies, and terrain. It's the best way to support us doing what we do by getting a membership. Each month, members get a credit for any of our past sets or this month's new terrain. Come celebrate Orktober with us and head on down to the Ork Rodeo. A whimsical assortment of high-octane hijinks, this set includes a series of walls and barricades that not only create a coliseum of chaos, but also fits in with our previous Orky wall terrains. Then there are the Goblin game carts, a series of mobile orc entertainments pulled along by an orcified food truck, literally dripping with some good orc grub. Rounding out this set are the three amigos, some brave goblins riding their violently bucking steeds. All this terrain was designed by us and is available at EonsOfBattle.com. With the jacket done, it was time for his skin. The sculpt is actually a really good likeness of Mark Hamill, and I don't want to use speed paint for this. I want total control. I base coated his skin with a saturated red beige, then mixed in some tan paint to get some highlights, painting all the shapes of his face. I finished off with painting his eyes, which turned out acceptable. They got a little bit big, but not too silly, and I moved on to his hair. For his hair, I also used opaque paints. Speed paints makes texture look really extreme, and I want his hair to have a softness. I base coated it with a dark tan, highlighting on top of this with a light tan, then used some very watery brown to shade. To paint in some texture, I painted some lines of an off-white for his hair, and then glazed my original base coat over top to soften it. On his lightsaber and DL44 blaster pistol, I used some black speed paint with a little bit of gray for the flash hider. And for that lightsaber, I base coated it with the blue paint, and then used the airbrush to spray a little bit of white around the handle to make it look glowing. I gave Luke a satin varnish and then knocked out the base exactly like I did on the troopers, finally squishing him down to standing proudly on the base. Luke's looking real good. I had the old Luke from the old starter set, but I never got around to painting him. But I did play him gray, and he managed to cut down one of Sean's ATSTs, which was glorious. Also, speaking of Luke's, I was wrong before. This is Luke Skywalker, Hero of the Rebellion, a commander, and Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker from Return of the Jedi is the operative. You're not allowed to take Commander Luke and Operative Luke in the same army. Although that would be funny, you're not allowed to do that, which kind of makes sense. Now, something else that comes in this box are some Wookie warriors, and I actually already have a bunch of Wookie warriors, 2 squads of Wookie warriors, and I got them about 75% of the way there. And then I just kind of stopped, and I haven't touched them since, but now that I have even more Wookie warriors to work on, I think it's about time I got this squad done. My Wookiees are the first of the new plastic figures I bought for Legion, and the speed paint worked really well on these suckers. I took all the different brown speed paints I own, trying to add some variety by giving each Wookiee a different mix. I have 2 final Wookiees, and I gave each of them a coat of brown speed paint. Then for the armor on their bodies, I used some black speed paint. Then for the weapons, I want these to have a coppery complexion that matches the Wookiee weapons from Revenge of the Sith. So I base coated the guns in a copper and the barrels and handles of the weapons in silver. I also threw silver onto all the ammo canisters on their bandoliers. Once the copper was dry, I washed these with a red speed paint and I put a black wash over the bladed weapons. I dry brushed the Wookiee guns with gold to hit on all the raised areas and make them brighter and shinier, and for the armor, on the black Wookiee warriors I used gray, and for the brown armor Wookiees I used tan. On the blades, I mixed silver and black and did some gradients to make them look really shiny. And for the Wookiee shields, I started out by glazing some dark brown, then some light brown on top so a little bit of the zenithal shows through. Then I did some dry brushing with a light brown, and then some tan to make these look like carved wood. On the Wookiee faces, I painted their noses and lips with black paint to match the Wookiees seen in the movies, and I also put this black paint over their fingers. With the Wookiees finally done, I hit them with a varnish and gave their bases the same speed paint and dirty down treatment to make them look right at home next to my other rebels. On some of these bases, I tried out the laser plants from Gamer's Grass. I really like how they look, and they looked pretty good with green speed paint painted over the original printing. It helps tint them to match the rest of my basing. I had a little bit more room on these bases because of how tall the Wookiees are, so I used a few 6mm brown tufts, and then I filled in the rest of the space with some small 2mm tufts. Rimming the base with the same red-brown color I've done on everybody else, and I've got a sizable pile of brand new minis on my desk. The Wookiee warriors are now complete. 12 Wookiee warriors. 12 is actually a lot of these suckers because a base squad is 3, and then you can upgrade them with the long rifle, bowcaster, and shield. And so I could actually run this as 4 squads of Wookiee warriors or 2 max loaded squads of Wookiee warriors. Man, I've been saying Wookiee warriors a lot. Now technically, because I have this box, I also have another 2 squads of Wookiee warriors, but those are gonna be for another day because there's another unit that I'm very familiar with and I wanna see what it looks like with the new sculpts. This is my old Rebel Commando sniper team. The poor sniper fell over in my box and his gun barrel is pretty bent. I might be able to fix it with my hairdryer, but these guys are some of the better painted of my old Rebel days. I cut out the sniper and spotter commandos from the box and glued them together, and because no one stopped me, I glued on 2 more Twi'lek heads. I got these guys ready, recreating my forest floor bases with some milliput, texture paste, pebbles, and coconut husk, and then they were ready for painting. I gave them the white prime brown zenithal so their colors are nice and bright, and I got to work. I decided on green because my original sniper team was green and I want to see how much better these new models look compared to my old ones, so I used green for their undersuit and then brown for the vest. I gave her khaki pants and leather gloves. Then for the backpack, pouches, and weapons, I hit these with some black speed paint, and now I've got all my colors on there, I want to use some opaque paints to push them a little bit further. I used grays to highlight the straps of her weapons and some yellow paint to brighten the green and yellow gloves. Then I painted her skin. I don't know what the official colors are for Twi'leks, but a rosy pink is one of them, and I glazed some red beiges with tans to get some highlight colors on her face and head tails. And for the spotter, I painted his head with oranges and yellows. I knocked out the bases, and I would say these 2 are a major improvement over my first try all those years ago. With the Rebel Commando weapon team done, that brings me up to 22 more miniatures added to my Star Wars Legion Rebel collection, which is a lot. And in terms of the quality of these new miniatures versus some of my old ones, it is a huge step up. My old Rebel Troopers were rough. I guess they are rough because I still have them and I'm probably still gonna play with them, but I might be looking a little closer at these guys than some of my old guys. It seems like Atomic Mass Games is refreshing all of the old catalog into new plastics and I am ready for it. Fleet Troopers. I want some new Fleet Troopers. Those are the rebels who were on the Tantive 5 with Leia when it was captured by Darth Vader. I like those weird like white helmets, motorcycle helmets, but no protection in the face. Those guys are pretty cool. And speaking of those guys, these guys are pretty cool. It's a really interesting experience to get to repaint some old models of mine, but that they're also better models than they were before. This happened before with Primaris Space Marines in Warhammer 40,000, but now I've gotten to experience it again with Legion. These guys are a lot better, and I finally painted a Luke Skypotter. I don't know what I'm gonna paint next for Legion, but I got plenty more guys in the box, so maybe some more Rebel Troopers. Thanks for watching.